Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here. And what I wanted to do is introduce myself first. My name is Richard Foster. I have been teaching on a college level, I believe 18 years now, and teaching C++ more years than I want to admit. But what I want to do here is just talk a few items that I feel are vitally important for any C++ program, regardless of which university that you're at or which professor you have. There's some very simple things that I want to address with you, and hopefully that will clear up a few things. So the very first thing I'm going to do is actually open up Visual Studio. I have Visual Studio 22 version on it. I have the community version, which is free. And notice that I get brought to a screen with a whole bunch of different projects that I've created. And what I want to do here is show you your best bet is to click on continue without code. When you install Visual Studio, you're given a wealth of options, and you want to make sure that you install all the C++ features. But if you're going to be doing anything in Python, you can also add the Python, and that will allow you to create standalone Python applications as well. That does not give you the ability to integrate Python and C++ without doing some other things. You'll need to download the Python. But this is not about Python right now. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new project. So when I click on File and New, the first thing I'm going to do is open up a project. And notice that I have a ton of different things available for me. Here are all the platforms that I can create in my version of Visual Studio. C#, which I really like, JavaScript, Python in here. These are all options that you can install when you install it. If you want to, you can always add it on later on. So for our intent and purposes, we want to use an empty project. And there's advantages to this, and there's other things that you can use, like the CLR, the Windows one. But for our purposes, we're going to use an empty project. So I'm going to click on Next. And notice that it goes right over here to the location over here. I keep everything in Visual Studio 2022 on my local drive. And of course, I copy it over to a backup drive. Here you get to name a project, and I'm going to call it Best Practices. Now, I am not a big fan of spaces in directories. It doesn't matter. Windows doesn't care. That's just my personal preferences. You feel free to do whatever way you want. And notice the checkbox in place solution and project in the same directory. That saves you the hassle of having to go an extra folder below where you really need to be. Everything is placed nice and neat for you. And I'm going to click on OK. So where did that actually come from? How did it know to go to that location? And I'm going to show you where to go. And notice that I have a Solution Explorer over here. If you don't see this, what you can do is click on View, and you'll see all kinds of options. So one of them would be Solution Explorer. Just click on that, or the shortcut is Control-Alt-L. So we're going to be working on a Windows computer. I know that there is a version of Mac that you can use Visual Studio on. It works very well. But there's also other Mac versions of C++ compilers that you can use as well, which I believe Xcode is a very good one, and I'm sure there's other ones. So let's go and see where we found that. So I'm going to go to Tools, and I'm going to go to Options, and it gives me all kinds of gazillion things. So where? So what we're going to do is go down to Project and Solutions, and we're going to go to Locations. And here you can change it from here. So notice that whenever you change it on one computer, you go to another computer, it's not going to be there. So I can just click on Project Locations, and I'm going to click on and we'll go to Visual Studio, and that looks good. I'm going to select that. So, or I could have just typed it in. And you don't need to worry about the templates or anything else. So I'm just going to click on OK, and hopefully everything's peachy. So now we can't do anything. So what I want to first talk about, though, is the advantages of using C++ over something like Python, or I'm going to turn this lamp out here as it's blaring on my screen. And some of the other ones, Python is very similar to C++, but the difference is Python is interpreted where C++ is compiled and can be run as a standalone program, and Python needs a compiler or a backend to run. But the biggest thing that I say is C++ is going to teach you strong, good discipline in there because it has rules and regulations that Python does not have. So I'm not going to really go much into them, but the biggest thing is the ability to declare data types and to make sure that you can't change something without knowing about it. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a new source file, and I'm going to click on add, and you can see we have new item, existing item. So really we're just going to use new item, and it gives you the opportunity to name it, and I'll just call it best. So now we have absolutely nothing. So this is not going to do anything. So, but what we can do here is just simply click on the top over here. The very first thing you should do in any program is put in comments. So notice that I have a bracket, a star, and then another star, and then a bracket. That means anything between them will be ignored by the compiler. If you want to do a single line comment, just put in 2. So what you want to put in here always is your name and the program name and a little bit about the program. The purpose of the program is to, and whatever. So now we have that out. Now bear in mind that many things we're going to talk about, C++ does not care about. I'm just going to give you some best practices which I think will help you in creating programs that are efficient and easy to debug if something goes wrong. So here we go. Let's start here with our includes. Nothing can happen without our includes. So the two most common things to include are going to be include IO stream. Now notice as I type IO, I get the IO stream. I'm just going to hit the tab key here, and then I'm going to include IO manip, which we're not going to use here, but that allows you to format numeric data in a multitude of different ways over here. So we also, in some of the programs that you may be getting, might have and include this. And it might be in quotes, it might be in brackets. PCH.H. Now, in all probability, I'm going to get an error because it's not going to find it. It doesn't know where it is. Well, PCH.H is a precompiled header. It's useful if you have a whole bunch of header files and you don't want to constantly compile them. For our interpreting purposes, we don't really need it. But if you get a starter file that has it or the STFFX, what I would recommend doing is just commenting out. There is a way to get rid of that as well, but you're not going to really need them unless there's a specific purpose. All C++ programs must start with main. And notice it's all lowercase. And then you need to have brackets. And we're going to do a curly brace. Now, what I recommend always, whenever you have an opening curly brace, I recommend having a closing curly brace that says what it is. So now we know this is main. Why this is important is because as you start doing nested curly braces, nested is, while, switch, all kinds of things, it's very easy to miss a bracket and then all of a sudden something doesn't work. Here's a way to work it out. Now, of course, you can go with this here, and this will collapse it as your opening and closing brackets. But we can talk about that for a while. So let's talk about two data types right now. There is, notice that it's automatically inted. So we're going to do an integer. And let's just say that we want to add two numbers together. So we can do number 1 And always, now this is not a requirement, but it's highly, highly recommended, is to initialize it. In most cases, Visual Studio is going to initialize it for you, but you might be using Eclipse, you might be using an older version or something else, and then all of a sudden it's not initialized and you try to use something and you run into a problem in here. So what I'm going to do here is put a comma. Now, I do not recommend doing this. So let me comment this out, although it is perfectly legal, but I do not recommend doing it, is number 1 and number 2. So why do I not recommend doing that? There's 2 reasons. So let's initialize this here. So it looks like we just created 2 numbers and both of them are initialized to 0 rather. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Number 1 is not initialized at all, or it could be initialized as something else. And number 2 is initialized. What I recommend doing is, let's comment this out here. And let's do integer. And then hit the enter key. Then I'm going to do number 1, or num1 equals 0, and a comma. And that allows me to say this number is 4, or whatever you want to put. And then we'll do number 2 equals 0. And then we need our semicolon, and of course, you want to comment that as well. Now again, this is not a requirement of C++, and it might not be a requirement of your professor, but it is good programming habits. And just remember one thing, there's a lot of things that are perfectly legal, but are not necessarily good. For instance, it's legal, and I hate to use this example, but it's the best one I can come up with. It's legal to have 2 beers and then drive, because in all probability, you're going to be under the legal limit. But is it a good idea? And the answer to me, my opinion, is not a good idea. Something that's not a good idea is best not to get done. So we've got that done here. So let's create a float, and we'll create a double. And we'll just call it f number equals, this time I'm going to put 0.0. And then we'll do a double, and we'll call it d number, and we'll also equal 0.0. Now, of course, you cannot declare 2 different variables of different data types without the semicolon and doing it separately here. So should we use float? Should we use double? And that's been an argument going on and on. If you use float, when you compile, in all probability, you're going to get a warning saying data may be lost. But for most purposes, float is going to be sufficient because it's going to give you a very large amount of data. You use whatever you feel more comfortable with. The compiler is going to run just as fast. If you have a doubt about it, just check with your professor. So to eliminate the compiler warning, you can just put an F here, and that should take care of that. So let's go now and create a simple program to get a number 1 and to get number 2. I'm going to do it a legal way, and then I'm going to tell you the way that I feel is the best way to do it. So you always want to have a prompt. So I'm going to type in cout, and we're going to get a little funny thing when we do this. So I'm going to do cout. Cout stands for console out. That means basically display. So we're going to click on this, and I'll just say enter 2, I don't spell very well, numbers followed by a space. I should probably put with a space between them. And notice I'm leaving a space here. So that means that nothing's going to be shoved up there. And then I'm going to do cin and number 1, comma, number 2. I do not recommend doing this I feel it's best to have enter first number, get the first number. Enter second number, because it's too easy to make a mistake with user. Now, why do we have this console out and console in, which this means display and this means get user input? Why is that happening? Well, it's very simple. It's part of the standard library. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in std and 2 semicolons, and it disappeared. Well, you might be doing std thousands of times in a program for C out, and same thing for C in, and there's other ones. And then, of course, end line will not work as well. So what you can do is something that there's a lot of controversy about, and I will show you what you can do. And you use your own judgment or check with your professor what he feels like. So I'm going to type in using namespace std. Now, the reason why it's not recommended is because that includes a whole bunch of stuff that you don't need. So we can use it and then we don't have to type in std. Or we can not use it and find an alternative way. So let's just comment this out. Let's get rid of this. Now notice the C is in here. So let's just go and do using std cin and see what happens. Ah, look at that, it disappeared. So let's get rid of this here. Now we don't have to worry about it. And the C out's still there. So let's just type in using std C out. So now we never have to type it anymore. So we're good in here. So what I don't want you to do is feel obligated to do it any way that I'm telling you. I'm just explaining to you the best practices of how I feel is good based upon all the years of experience that I've had as a programmer making the very same mistakes in here. So let's go and do this the way I feel is the best way to do. Enter 2 numbers, enter number 1. And then we're just going to get in here. Later on, I'm going to do a video on alternatives to CN, some issues with CN, and whether or not you should use it. I'm more preferential to using getLine for various different reasons, but CN works very well as well. So let's go and do enter second number. Notice the space here. And then we're going to do CN. And then this just type in C out. You entered. And what I want to do is go to another line, even though you wouldn't normally do it. And the way you do that with end L. Now notice that we have the same issue with end L. So you figure, oh, I don't need to do this. Let's just put in a new line character. And that works well too. But the problem with the new line character, it does not flush the buffer. So it's better to make sure you have an end L at the very end in there. So we're going to do the end L. And if I could spell, that would be good. I can't. So now we have to do the same thing with end L. So you may be thinking, that's a lot of things that you need to type every time you open a program. Well, nobody says you have to do that. Easiest thing to do is create a template and use that template every time that you run a program. So you entered this, and let's just do C out. Number 1. And notice a space and another space. Number 2. And then we need a return. And we're good. So let's go and run the program and compile it. So the easiest way to run it is just click up here, but I'm going to hit Control F5 on my Windows computer, and let's see if we get any errors. If we get any errors, we can fix them. And so far, looking good. So it says enter first number, and I'm going to type 50, and enter second number, 75. And you entered 50 and 75. So now let's do something, and we're going to create a sum. And I'm going to show you what I feel is, again, best practices. And of course, you would comment that out. So I'm going to print Cout the sum is, and then I'm going to put number 1 plus number 2, and we'll put in an endl there, and we'll run it again. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, but again, this is a video on best practices, so I want to try to keep it to that as well. So let's go and compile it. We'll do the same two numbers, and we should get 125. And that looks good. Now, here's what I recommend doing. And I'm going to explain why after I do it. So let's just put sum equals, and notice I'm putting in parentheses. Is that a requirement? Absolutely not. Is it a good idea? Yes. Why is it a good idea? It's because it's very easy to make a mistake when you don't have them. Here it's very clear, especially if you have several different things. So let's just type in sum here, and let's run it again and see what happens. So again, we'll do 50, and we'll do 75, and the sum is 125. So I am almost at the end of what I wanted to do. I'm going to end the video and create a second part of this where I'm going to go over different other variable types and sticking to one input line we talked about. I'm going to talk about the issues with CN, a little bit more on calculations. And we did this, the end algebra. So I did almost everything, but I want to keep this video as short as possible. So let me, at this point in time, sum up here the importance of following it for your own personal help, really, your own personal help. So the idea is you want to run a program, and if something doesn't work out just proper, then you want to be able to go back and figure out what it is. So what I'm going to do here is make a mistake and try to compile it. And let's just say I make an error here. Now notice it says there are build errors. You want to know. So you answer that no. And then it tells you what the error is. So notice it says number 2 is undefined, and it tells me where it is. And most of the time it tells you where the line number is. In this particular case, it's not. So we know that we can just go back and fix that. Here is information about the error itself. So, and then also notice that number 21, we're trying to use it and it's not declared. So you'll get an error as well as that. So now we're looking good. Let's run this one more time. What I tell my students all the time, make sure that you make a change and then compile it and run it to make sure. If you make 10 different changes and all of a sudden something doesn't work, what makes it, where's the error? I also highly recommend every time that you start working on a file that you copy and make a duplicate of it. So if you have something go wrong, you can always go back to where you left off and not have to undo anything. I'll give you an example. Was I deleted a line by accident, and I was getting an error all the time, and the program was crashing. And so I couldn't figure out what I did, and it was very simple. I had deleted a line, didn't realize I deleted a line. I went back to a copied version of it, I knew where the error was, and then I realized, oh, I deleted something that was vitally important by accident when I was trying to clean up a function in there. So we're going to talk about comments later on in another video and some other best practices, but as promised, I wanted to keep this video as short as humanly possible. I'll be giving you more best practices in there. We'll talk about interdivision and how easy that is to go. I know if you are a Python person, you already know that there's different divisions in Python, one for integer and one for non-integer. C++ does not have that, but it's very easy to fix on that. So that is everything for this error here, or for this video. Let's run this program again just before we close out. And I'm going to make an error. So I'm going to type in 125. And here's why I don't like using CN. There are ways to fix this. And let's just do A. And all of a sudden, boom, the second number is 0. Hey, I didn't type in a second number. That's because CNN or CN stops as soon as it gets a non-numeric character, which is A. Well, then when it took A for the second one, and it decided that was 0. So we're going to talk about that later on. I've written a function, how you can get numeric input using getLine and some functions. I created very simple functions. So far everything looks good. Let's run it one more time to make sure everything is just fine. And we'll do 125, and we'll do 75. We should get an even 200. And we did. That is it. Hope this video is good for you. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.